Welcome to day 2. It's wonderful to see so many people on the platform this afternoon. I am Barb McIngvale, and I am a court commissioner with Pierce County Superior Court, and I have the honor and privilege of serving as the judicial co-chair with Mr. Hasslinger.
And today what we're going to do is we're going to just start off with some housekeeping stuff. So Gina, you want to share with us a little bit about clock hours?
Yeah, thank you. If this is your first day of the conference, welcome. If it's your second, welcome back. And we have clock hours available, both CLE and CJE hours available for our legal professionals. You can sign up for those clock hours. You only need to do it once during the entire conference. And you can use this link that I'm putting in the chat right now for signing up for those clock hours. Then for our educational partners as well, there are clock hours available through PD Enroller. This is also only once for the entire conference, and that link is also now in the chat. And I will pass back to the co-chairs. Thank you.
All right. So we are going to start by introducing some of the wonderful speakers we have today. And I have the real honor of introducing Representative Tina Orwall to everyone. She is a Washington State representative for the 33rd District, and she also serves as the Deputy Speaker Pro Tem of the State House of Representatives. She's worked with all levels of government. She helps embrace best practices to better serve the community. For 20 years of experience working in the public mental health system, as well as her expertise in strategic planning, workforce development, and affordable housing, has established her as a valued legislator and community leader. And we are so thrilled to have her with us.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. I wanted to come say hello. They were teasing me before we started here that I show up at all the conferences, and it's true. I think the last one in person was in Central, and I do because I'm your biggest fan. And you know, the work you do is so essential. And you know, I know we've all had different issues we've dealt with throughout the years of trying to figure out the different partnerships, but I could not be more proud. You know, one of the things I thought about this morning is, you know, as we entered this pandemic, we all were getting ready for a sprint, and it turned into a marathon. And I think of how isolated our families are feeling, our youth. And, you know, I just cannot tell you how important you are in helping to reconnect. And one of the things I'm so proud of around the Becca task force, and I want to do a shout out to CCYJ, is that you've always been ahead of the curve looking at trauma-informed care, involving the community in healing, looking at making sure we're doing culturally sensitive services. And so, you know, as you take on this work today, please know that my colleagues and I in Olympia are here to support you. And I don't know if any of my colleagues are there, but I want to say hello if you are. And, you know, one of the things I'm working on now, and I just want to mention it, is we're implementing 988. And 988 is going to start in July of 2022, and it'll be a 3-digit behavioral health crisis line. And this is going to be a once in a lifetime opportunity to rethink our system, to build something that really is trauma informed and healing. You know, so often, and true for our youth, is that they're often traumatized when they're having a behavioral health crisis. And so I just want to say you are very important partners. We're looking for more voices to help us shape the new system, as well as student voices. And I want to let you know that as we build this system and we do investments, that I really hope it's going to make the work you're doing that much easier, right? There'll be places to connect the youth and the families. And again, I just want to say thank you for your time and your talents, and please take care of yourself. It is just such an overwhelming time, and I know we're all when someone says, how are you? We never say fine anymore. We talk about how overwhelmed we are. So you, in your positions, receive a lot of secondary trauma. And so please keep yourself healthy. Know in Olympia, we're here to support you, and let us know what you need so you continue with this great work. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Appreciate that. And next we have on our list is Dr. Amanda Gilman from the Washington State Center for Court Research. And she's going to talk to us a little bit about examining the use of juvenile detention for Becca youth in Washington State. So Dr. Gilman.
Thank you, Glenn. Let me just share my screen here. All right. All right, so good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can see this in presentation mode. Happy to be here today. So I am the last probably 5 years, I've come to this Becca conference to share with you updated data on our state's use of detention for non-offender matters, which I define as, of course, Becca matters, but also dependency. So my definition here is truancy, ARY, or CHINS petitions, or also a dependency matter. And so I'm happy this year to be able to provide you with some updated data from 2020. And as Representative Orwell spoke about, it's obviously been just really an unprecedented year for all of us, very unique in many, many ways. And so we're going to see in just a minute that there's been some pretty drastic changes in our juvenile justice system in terms of the use of detention for non-offender matters over the last year or so. So I'll start by giving you just some of the raw numbers, and then we can go into looking at how these numbers compare to previous years. So in our state in 2020, we had 196 admissions where the primary reason was a non-offender matter. So again, a violation of a court order related to a truancy, ARY, CHINS petition, or a dependency matter. And there were 143 unique youth who were admitted. So that means at least a few of them had more than one admission in 2020 somewhere in the state. And that represents about 3.5% of all detention admissions statewide last year. So as always, we have quite a bit of variability across the state. We're obviously a decentralized court system. So courts have a lot of autonomy in their decision making. So we had, quite a few jurisdictions where they had 0 admissions for non-offenders in 2020, and up to about 21% of all detention admissions in some jurisdictions were for a non-offender matter. Although that's kind of the outlier. Most of the jurisdictions, it was pretty low. And then we look at the most common reasons. So of the 196 admissions last year, about 65% of those were due to a violation of a court order related to an ARY petition, about 30% for truancy, about 3% for CHINS or other, and this other is typically a combination of a few petitions. So we typically have at least a few youth who are admitted and have multiple Becca petitions open, and about 2% of these non-offender admissions were the result of a violation of a court order related to a dependency matter. So those of you who are kind of familiar with the journey that our state has been on over the last few years, you know that the numbers I'm presenting today seem pretty low compared to what we've seen over the previous years. And this shows that the total number of non-offender detention admissions over the last 6 years. And you can see here, since we've been tracking this. So in 2015 here, we had over 2,000 admissions, and then there's been a really steady decline over the last few years, and then a really drastic drop from 2019 to 2020. In fact, it was about an 80% drop in the number of detention admissions where the primary reason was a non-offender matter. And if we kind of break this down by petition type, we can see here there was about a 73% decrease from, so on the left, we have the 2019 admissions, and on the right, 2020. So there was about a 73% decrease for ARY admissions for an ARY, 86% decrease for truancy, 95% for dependency. So we're getting pretty close to 0 here in 2020. Here you can see there were 4 admissions that were the result of a violation of a court order related to a dependency case, and then about a 79% decrease for CHINS or another non-offender matter. So for me, when I was looking at the data, the first question that came to mind was, this drastic decrease we're seeing, is this all due entirely to the pandemic, right? There was a lot going on in 2020. At the forefront of all of our minds was COVID and everything that was happening with COVID. So as we saw a couple of slides ago, we were already on this, as a state, we were already on a downward trajectory over the last 6 years or so. So I can say pretty confidently that we would have seen some sort of drop from 2019 to 2020 in terms of the number of detention admissions for non-offender matters. But obviously it was a much more drastic decrease than we've seen in previous years. So there are a couple other things that we can look at. I looked here at specifically at the post-COVID, which I'm calling April 2020 to December 2020 period, and we compared that to the pre-COVID period, which is the same 9 months in 2019, because as you know, detention admissions, there's sort of a seasonal aspect to it. So pulled the same 9-month period from 2019 to compare that. And there was about a 60% decrease in total detention admissions between those two periods. So when we look at the primary reason for detention and the decrease from 2019 to 2020, we see here that non-offenders actually had the largest decrease of almost 90%. So my point here is that, yes, COVID affected detention admissions, or at least sort of what was happening between 2019 and 2020 affected overall detention admissions, but we're seeing a larger decrease specifically for non-offenders. And it makes sense. You can look here, there's about a 64% decrease for misdemeanors and 68% for offender violations. So that's typically probation violations, but only about 49% for felony. So I think that makes sense. During the pandemic, courts were trying to keep as many low-level, lower risk youth out of detention as possible during the pandemic. So another thing to think about is Senate Bill 5290, which was passed in the 2019-2020 legislative session, which, as we all know, we all are very intimately familiar with this. This legislation phases out the use of detention for non-offender youth. So in mid-2020, detention was no longer an option for courts for judges for dependency and CHINS youth. And then obviously courts were anticipating the change that was coming up in 2021. Just this last summer, we saw that this legislation went into effect also for truant youth. And then, also in a couple of years, we'll see the same for ARY youth. So when we look at the number of petitions that were actually coming into the court, we see here that there was a drop in Becca petitions and dependency filings between 2019 and 2020, but it wasn't nearly as drastic as the drop we've seen in detention admissions for those as a result of those petitions. So there was about a 62% decrease in truancy petitions filed, about a 21% decrease in dependency filings, 54% decrease for ARY, and about 27% decrease for CHINS. So my point here is just, yes, there were fewer youth coming into the system. So you can see a 21% decrease for dependency, but it was a 95% decrease in the use of detention for youth with a dependency case open who had a violation of a court order. So all this to say that I think, we've seen a huge decrease in 2020. Is it all due to COVID? I think that's a big part of it. Some other things to keep in mind is, again, we were on this existing downward trajectory already as a state. So we would have seen some sort of decrease. There are also fewer petitions being filed in the first place. So fewer youth were coming into the court system, and obviously fewer youth with opportunity to have a violation of a court order and then be placed in detention. And then COVID, of course, we think that the main driving force here is the decreased use of detention for lower risk youth in terms of criminality. So now there's a much higher proportion of the youth are in detention now. It's a much higher proportion are in for an alleged or adjudicated felony offense, and a much smaller proportion are in for misdemeanor offenses, violations of court order related to an offender matter or a non-offender matter. And then, of course, the recent legislation, Senate Bill 5290, which has sort of drastically changed the landscape of our court systems with regard to the Becca petitions being filed and dependency matters as well. So a couple questions that still remain. What's going to happen? Are we ever going to return to this, the pre-COVID levels that we saw in terms of juvenile detention in our state? It remains to be seen when we're talking about youth who are in the court system as a result of an offender matter. We obviously will not return to pre-COVID levels for Becca cases because of Senate Bill 5290. So, as I said, this last summer, detention is no longer an option for youth with a truancy petition as of July 1st. And then, it's also going to come into effect pretty soon here for youth with an ARY petition as well. So, it remains to be seen what's going to happen for the detention system as a whole. And then what are juvenile courts using in lieu of detention? So we know that several hundred youth, well, we can guess that about several hundred youth would have probably gone to detention in 2020 were it not for COVID and some of these other, the legislation, some other issues that were happening in 2020. So what is happening with those youth? What kind of services are they receiving? Are they being completely diverted from the court? It really remains to be seen. So we actually have a research project underway that we've been working on, partnering with the Office of Juvenile Justice to look at this both quantitatively and qualitatively to see what kind of strategies that courts have come up with over the last year and a half in these very unique times that we've been in. Strategies for youth who are, they don't deem appropriate for detention. So we're working on that. Stay tuned. I'll be happy to come back next year to the Becca conference and give a little bit more information about what we found in that project. And I don't know, that's my time, I think. I don't know, Gina, let me know if there's times for questions. Really happy to answer them now, or as always, please feel free to send me an email and let me know if you have any questions or comments. And then our annual detention reports can be found on our website. We actually just published the 2020 report earlier this week. So that is on our website now, and you can get a lot more information in addition to what I just shared today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I really appreciate it. Anyone have any questions before we go back to our co-chairs? All right, Barb and Glenn, it's back over to you. Thank you so much.
All right, well, now comes the time when we are going to be able to split off into breakout rooms. We've got 3 really great presentations for you to choose from. I'm going to tell you about the first one and third one, and Glenn is going to talk to you about the second breakout room that we have. The first breakout room you'll see is called Community Track, and it's all about choices. This is a really wonderful school attendance early intervention workshop for 8th grade students. And if anybody attended one of the Becca conferences, what was it, maybe about 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they had a presentation that was wonderful, where they actually demonstrated how it works. So Leo Muller is the executive director of Choices Education Group. And he says, we've arrived at a new age of understanding the nuances of human development from a biological and neurological perspective. The body of research, neuroscience, has created a new frontier of cutting edge practices and understandings. They align with creating ideal conditions for learning in our schools and further inform daily experiences of students and families in our greater communities. The systems and practices described in this session today have shown great results throughout the broader Seattle region and now other parts of the country. The focus today will be on brain development from a neurological perspective, meaning nature, and how our experiences, thinking, and behaviors are additionally a product of what we're exposed to in the world around us. In other words, nurture. The remedy is the promotion of protective factors in place of risk factors and transitioning from being trauma-informed to trauma-responsive. Glenn.
Thank you. And for our educational track, we're going to be hearing from several of our friends from Wazoo. First of all, this is the Warren's IES grant, an interactive session. They're looking for feedback, seeking guidance and suggestions for the initial grant activities. Longtime friend of the Task Force, Bruce Austin, research professor from Wazoo, is going to be participating in this. Dr. Brian French, Berry Family Distinguished Professional from Wazoo. Dr. Chad Goach, I'm hoping I'm saying that right, assistant professor from Wazoo. Dr. Marcus Poppin, assistant professor from Wazoo, and Dr. Mary Rotuda Roberts, associate professor from University of Alberta. So the Becca conference attendees are going to be invited to interact in this session to improve the warrants. The attendees will be informed about a recent grant award from the Institute of Educational Services through the U.S. Department of Education that will engage the Warrens community in research activities during the next 4 years of the grant and to refine and improve Warrens to better aid students. During the session, they're going to be seeking input from attendees to achieve these goals. Develop strength-based items to add to the assessment instruments, update item content to reflect the technology-driven world faced by today's students, validate the middle school instrument and revisions to the high school version, revise the Warren score report to improve its usefulness for informing interventions, and focus on improving accessibility and equity as it relates to Warren's use. The tangible benefits to this session attendees include a better understanding of the Warrens and its usefulness to improve outcomes for students, and the opportunity to inform our efforts to revise and improve it. The benefit to Warren's users will include updated items, strength-based items, Warren's report that better supports youth intervention and planning, and reduced subscription rate during the life of the grant. And back to you, Barb.
All right, and our third breakout room is called Care Card, and you'll see on your choices on the menu, Care Workplace Resilience. And this is about workplace resilience during COVID, workplace trends, resources and strategies, reopening, reorienting, and navigating unknowns. Dr. Tona McGuire, the co-lead with the Behavioral Health Strike Team for the Washington Department of Health, is our presenter today. Workplace resilience covers common phases of disaster and related behavioral health impacts, how living with the chronic stress of this long disaster affects our neurology and behavior, ways to enhance personal and workplace resilience, navigating the unknowns during the recovery process, how to practice healthy boundaries and active coping, and the PEACE model for resilience building.
Thank you so much, and excited to hear from all of our speakers today. I'm going to open the breakout rooms, so if you are able to, at this time on your Zoom screen, you will see on the bottom console where your mute and video functions are. If you have it full screen, there should be a section that says breakout rooms. If you have it smaller, it might be under the ... on more for breakout rooms. There you can click on that and go ahead and join the session that you would like to join, and we will all meet you in those rooms very shortly. If that's not an option for you, another option is you're all going off to your sessions. You can also rename yourself with the room you would like to be in, and we will put you in that room, with one being the Choices program. Sorry, I lost my, yes, one is Choices,